Good evening. I'm Nima Rajan, and this is Forum Daily for Thursday, December 15th. We start the newscast with an update on the winter weather that's hitting the country. Winter is arriving early in much of Canada. This comes as a storm system is expected to dump large amounts of snow on several provinces. Special weather alerts were issued for parts of southeastern Saskatchewan and southern Manitoba, where 30 centimeters could fall. Meanwhile, freezing rain warnings were in place across much of southwestern Ontario. This while weather advisories were in place for Toronto and areas east and into Quebec. Special weather statements were also in place for parts of New Brunswick, where significant snowfall is expected. All right, switching gears to Canada's real estate market, as home sales were down 3.3% in November. This erases a gain seen in October and resumes an overall downward trend for the year. The Canadian Real Estate Association says the number of newly listed homes also fell in November, dropping 1.3% on a month-over-month basis. The actual national average home price in November was over $632,000, which is down 12% from the same month last year. All right, well, meanwhile, Canada's banking regulator has left its key stress test for uninsured mortgages unchanged. This comes despite calls for it either to be lowered or eliminated as higher interest rates are pushing down home sales. The Office of the Superintendent of Financial Institutions says the minimum qualifying rate for uninsured mortgages will remain the mortgage contract rate plus 2 percentage points or 5.25%, whichever is greater. The stress test applies to residential mortgages with a down payment of 20% or more. All right, turning to a new report by Canada's Financial Intelligence Agency, which looks into signs of homegrown terrorism. Over the last 3 years, the agency uncovered activity related to homegrown terrorism, the bankrolling of international terrorist groups, as well as attempts by Canadians to join extremism efforts abroad. These efforts were by the Financial Transactions and Reports Analysis Centre of Canada. They are helping banks and other institutions that handle large sums of money to better identify transactions that are linked to terrorism. All right, back to housing. As the annual pace of housing starts dipped 0.2% from October to November. Canada Mortgage and Housing Corporation reports the seasonally adjusted annual rate of housing starts in November was just over 264,000 units. A new report from the C.D. Howe Institute says Canada would have been in the hole for billions of dollars if it had delayed on rolling out its COVID-19 vaccination efforts. The report shows that a 6-month vaccine delay would have cost $156 billion in economic activity. The report goes on further to show that widespread vaccination prevented some 54,500 COVID-19 cases, which would have been equal to about $331 million in lost wages for 2021. Moving to the prairies now, where the number of overdose deaths in Saskatchewan is on par with those of the previous year, but that number could still grow. According to a report from the province's coroner, as of November 30th, there have been 395 drug toxicity deaths. The report adds that 171 of those are confirmed drug toxicity deaths. This while 224 are suspected. This puts the province behind the 2021 numbers by 15, with 410 reported deaths, 398 of which are confirmed. The COP15 Biodiversity Conference is moving into its final few days. Environment ministers from around the world are wrapping up talks on how to preserve what's left of the planet's biodiversity. Talks briefly broke down yesterday, but delegates resolved their major differences, which were over concerns that pledges from rich countries for conservation funding were too small and vague. All right, well, on the West Coast, this fall's unusually dry weather has resulted in record low water levels in some rivers on BC's south coast. BC Hydro says it has adjusted its operations in order to make sure there's enough water flow downstream for fish habitat. The Crown Utility says it will be able to keep up with power demands this winter because of its integrated systems. It says historic low water flows have been recorded in several smaller generating facilities in the Lower Mainland and on Vancouver Island. And on the other side of the country, the Newfoundland and Labrador government says the amount of crown land developed for growing fruit and vegetables has more than doubled since 2016. Now, this is according to the Department of Fisheries, Forestry, and Agriculture. It says over 1,200 hectares have been developed for fruit and vegetable production, compared to 590 hectares in 2016. All right, stay with us. We'll have more news from around the world shortly after the break. Well, as Canadians prepare for the end of the year, the economic outlook for 2023 does not look promising. And some investment professionals are encouraging people to cross their T's and dot their I's coming into the new year. Now, this comes following yet another interest rate hike by the Bank of Canada earlier this month, one by the U.S. Federal Reserve on Wednesday, and others by the Bank of England and the European Central Bank on Thursday. Meanwhile, investors continue to hope that the bear market will finally come to an end in 2023, although no one has a clear date in mind for when exactly that would happen. Well, joining us now to give us his outlook for 2023 and what investors can do to prepare is Brendan Caldwell, Director at Caldwell Securities Limited. Brendan, welcome back to Forum Daily.
Well, good to be back, Nima, even in these dark times.
Yes, definitely, Brendan. Now, considering we're just over 2 weeks until the end of the year, is there anything that investors should consider regarding their portfolio right now?
Well, with your introduction there, it does make one want to feel like you should run for the hills, but I would encourage people to actually be a lot more thoughtful about it, in that if you genuinely think you're going to need money, like if you have a portfolio of, or you're going to need 100,000 or a million or whatever the number is, even 10, whatever money you think you're going to need in 2023, then yeah, it may make some sense to set that money aside now so that you're not worried about the ups and downs of the market in the short term. But this pervasive negativity, the concern about interest rates going up, about inflation, about a recession, all of that has got the market somewhat negative. It's down today, but I think it's largely being absorbed into the market consciousness. So short of some other external shock hitting the market that we don't expect, I actually think that 2023 could be a very good year, surprisingly.
Some interesting points to consider, Brendan. Now, in addition to these interest rate hikes, we know a lot of people are thinking about inflation, the rising cost of living. So what would be the best way to hedge against inflation, especially coming into the new year?
Well, it's a tough one, Nima, because it's affecting everybody in all different levels, from food prices, no matter what the CEO of Loblaws might say, to rents, to really almost every expense in life. But from a portfolio perspective, there are really two types of investments: ones that have fixed incomes and ones that have the ability to increase the revenue that they generate to the portfolio. And those latter tend to be in the form of dividend-paying stocks. So my client's emphasis for the next while, and indeed for the last while, has been to own stocks that have the capacity to both grow their earnings and the distributions of dividends that they pay out to their shareholders. So companies with rising dividends are probably the best bet to combat over a longer period of time inflation, if it's indeed here to stay.
All right, Brendan, I want to switch gears and talk about RRSP accounts now. We know a new year means new 2023 birthdays, and once you turn 71, you must change your RRSP account into an RRIF account. So tell us a little bit more about these accounts and what seniors need to consider when it comes to RRIF accounts.
Well, there's lots of different vehicles which to save. So younger people, the first vehicle they should likely use is a tax-free savings account, a TFSA, because there's no deduction to put the money in, but all the money in it accumulates tax-free, and then there's no tax to take it out. Fine. But the RSP, useful for once you've maxed out your TFSA for saving, say for a house, and ultimately for retirement. These RSPs have to, when you get it up into your 70s, be turned into an account where the money is paid out on a regular basis, because the government, having allowed you to make a tax deduction putting money into your RSP once it's taxes eventually. So yes, the year you turn 71, your RSP needs to be turned into a RIF, a Registered Retirement Income Fund. And then starting the age of 72, that begins to pay out. My advice to people is to try and minimize the amount taken out of your RIF. You can either use your age or your spouse's age as the basis for taking money out, because as you get older, you need to take a higher percentage out. I suggest using the younger of the two. And unless you actually need the money for income, to take it out toward the end of the year, to give it the maximum time to continue to accumulate, because the money can still grow in these RIFs even after you're retired and grow on a tax deferred basis.
Always a helpful interview, Brendan. Thank you again for your time today.
Thank you, Nima.
All right, stay with us. We'll be right back after the break. And when we return, we're going to hear more about the markets with Catherine Murray from the Buck Stops here. So stay tuned. We'll be right back after a short break. All right, welcome back. Up now, we have Forum Daily's weekly market update with Catherine Murray, host of the Buck Stops here. All yours, Catherine.
Thanks, Nima. Hello, everyone, and welcome to your weekly market recap. I'm Catherine Murray. Well, we are seeing North American equity markets trade lower to the tune of about 1.5% to 2% this morning. This, of course, follows the U.S. Federal Reserve's comments yesterday in raising the rates by 50 basis points, and also weaker than expected U.S. economic data. So let's break this down a little bit. We did hear from the U.S. Federal Reserve yesterday, where they raised rates by 50 basis points, very much as anticipated by investors. And this does follow 4 rate hikes of 75 basis points. What was different and why the market sold off yesterday and continue to do so today is because U.S. Fed Chair Jerome Powell continued to be quite hawkish in his stance versus market expectations. He basically said they're going to continue to raise rates because they want to make sure that they've combated inflation. So it looks as though the rate to expect in 2023 is around 5.1%, yet the market still is anticipating a little bit lower, anywhere from about 4.75 to 5%. So not really believing the U.S. Federal Reserve, but they were very clear in their intention to continue to raise rates. Higher for longer should be your takeaway, but we'll see because the market is not believing that. We also had disappointing U.S. economic data out this morning on the manufacturing front. New York as well as Philly manufacturing data came in below expectations. And also retail sales was quite a bit weaker versus expectations. So in other words, perhaps the U.S. consumer, and likely the Canadian consumer as well, is already and have been feeling the impact of rising rates on their pocketbook. So taken together, the market is concerned about rising rates, a tightening balance sheet, and the impact that that's been having on the economy. Now, away from that, as we look at other areas of the market, we are seeing WTI down by about 1% today, but this follows a 2.5% rally yesterday. And we're also keeping our eyes on some stock-specific stories. Tesla is front and center. It turns out that Elon Musk has sold about $3.6 billion of Tesla stock, even though back in April, he indicated that there would not be any further sales. So that stock has been down by about 12.5% this week alone. We're also keeping our eyes on Verizon. It got an upgrade over at Morgan Stanley, in part based on valuation, sending that stock up by 2.5%, 2.3%. So certainly bucking the overall market trends. We also had an upgrade over at Piper Sandler of SBH, Sally Beauty Holdings, sending that stock up by about 2% as well. Keep your eyes on Nucor within the steel segment. Their fourth quarter guidance was below consensus. That stock's down by about 5%. I highlight that stock in the sense that it is somewhat representative, perhaps, of the industrial environment in terms of demand, et cetera. And also Lennar within the housing environment. Their new orders did come in light. Revenue beat in their quarter. They reported yesterday after the close, but the new orders are light. So that stock's down by about 1.7%. Now, as we look at the Canadian marketplace as well, TSX is down by about 1.6% right now. The ECB, I should point out, did raise rates by 50 basis points this morning. And we continue to hear from various central bankers, whether it's the Fed yesterday, the ECB, or the BOC, indicating that they're going to continue to raise rates. So the BOC, the Bank of Canada, they are going to be data dependent, but we have heard that they want to make sure that they combat inflation. So in other words, there's a risk to doing less. They're better off to do more. More means raising rates. Keep in mind as we think about this that we've already had about 400 basis points of increases thus far, clearly impacting the Canadian consumer. You do have reports out as well that the hike of about 400 basis points is impacting the debt to income level, which has moved higher, 183.3%. So that continues to move higher. In other words, people continue to feel the pain of higher interest rates. Importantly as well, when you think of higher interest rates and the impact on the housing environment and those looking to get a mortgage, we have also heard from OSFI that they are not going to make any changes to the mortgage stress test, but will continue to review them. So that's important if you're out there in the mortgage market. And lastly, just on the Canadian manufacturing front, we did see the manufacturing tick up a little bit for the September time period, up by about 2.8 billion, or coming in at 2.8 billion. So certainly a lot going on as it relates to the economic data, and all eyes really are focused on what we're hearing from company managements in terms of their outlook for 2023 and what they're baking in. Nima, a lot going on. I'll leave it there. Back to you.
All right, thanks for that, Catherine. Again, that was Catherine Murray, host of The Buck Stops Here, which airs on Sunday mornings at 9 a.m. Eastern only on the News Forum Network. So stay tuned. Forum Daily will be right back with a look at the major news stories and headlines from around the world after a short commercial break. So stay with us. We'll be right back. The Bank of England raised its key interest rate again today, but at a softer pace than in recent months. The rate increase of half a percentage point to 3.5% was toned down as the pace of inflation shows signs of easing. This mirrors action by the U.S. Federal Reserve yesterday. The European Central Bank also followed suit today and raised its rate by half a point. South of our border, U.S. retail sales dropped at the start of the holiday shopping season last month. The government said today that retail sales fell 0.6% from November to December. This comes after a sharp 1.3% rise the previous month. Sales fell at furniture, electronics, and home and garden stores. Uncertainty remains in China a week after authorities eased some of the country's strictest COVID-19 containment measures. There are no indications of the massive surge that some had feared. However, the government says it is now essentially impossible to get an accurate picture of actual case numbers countrywide. Pharmacies are running out of medications and testing kits, and many hospital staff are staying home. China's zero-COVID policy of lockdowns, quarantines, and mandatory testing was blamed for hindering the economy. The effect of last week's relaxation of measures has yet to be seen. All right, well, back in the U.S., the Biden administration is again making some free COVID-19 tests available to all American households. This comes as it unveils its contingency plans for potential coronavirus surges this winter. After a 3-month hiatus, the administration is making 4 rapid virus tests available to all U.S. households through a website starting Thursday. COVID-19 cases have shown a marked increase following the American Thanksgiving holiday. Well, it looks like the EU may be getting bigger. Kosovo's prime minister has formally submitted his country's application to be granted candidacy status for membership in the European Union. It is a first step in a long process to eventual membership. Kosovo is locked in a long-lasting dispute with another EU hopeful, Serbia. This while 5 EU countries have not recognized Kosovo as a nation at all. Serbia reacted with anger to Kosovo's EU application. Moving to a ruling from the International Criminal Court. Judges at the ICC have rejected the appeal by a former commander in a brutal Ugandan rebel group. This is over his conviction on dozens of charges of war crimes and crimes against humanity. Dominic Ongwen is a former commander in Lord's Resistance Army. He was convicted in a landmark judgment nearly 2 years ago of 61 offenses. This includes murders, rapes, forced marriages, and recruiting child soldiers from 2002 to 2005. The appeals judges also upheld his 25-year sentence. All right, well, meanwhile, public anger over a legal decision in Turkey has led to thousands of people gathering for a rally outside the Istanbul Municipal Building for a second day. They met to denounce a legal verdict that could lead to the city's popular mayor getting ousted from office and barred from running in elections. An Istanbul court convicted Mayor Ekrem İmamoğlu on Wednesday of insulting members of Turkey's Supreme Electoral Council. It sentenced him to prison and imposed a political ban. The mayor plans to appeal the verdict. Opposition parties allege the trial is an attempt to eliminate a key opponent to the Turkish leader. All right, well, the U.S. is revising a tool to track the rising cases of severe obesity among children. Updated growth charts now extend to a body mass index of 60, up from previous charts that stopped at a BMI of 37. This with additional categories to track obesity in kids aged 2 to 19. Experts say that in recent decades, severe obesity among children in America has nearly quadrupled. The CDC charts are the most widely used tool in the U.S. to track growth and development in kids. A Russian space official says a micrometeorite strike likely caused a coolant leak from a Russian space capsule, which was attached to the International Space Station. The crew isn't in danger, but the discovery of the leak forced the cancellation of a spacewalk planned for this morning. Russian flight controllers are still assessing the situation and following temperature indicators on the Soyuz. And they say decisions about the future flight program will be made on the basis of that analysis. Well, you might say there's been a humpback heyday for the whales this year in the Salish Sea on the west coast of BC. The Canadian Pacific Humpback Collaboration says nearly 400 of the big mammals have been spotted. This marks the highest number counted in the area since researchers started keeping records. All right, I'm Nima Rajan, and that'll do it for your look at national and international news for today. Remember, for more news on demand, you can visit our website or follow us on social media. Take care, Canada. We'll see you next time.